This time, we returned to the ranching area in Texas, but we were forced to change our strategy. The tight terrain and dense woods made it impossible to transport the large trap cages any deeper. So we switched to smaller traps, more flexible, more discreet, but capable of holding only a few animals at a time. And that was the real problem. Could traps this small actually help us control an entire population of wild boars? Or would the boars themselves become wary and disappear before we had the chance to do anything? The first trap was placed deep in the woods, and after hours of traveling by utility vehicle, we finally reached its location. As we moved closer, everything became clear. Inside was a pair of wild boars that had been confined overnight, pacing constantly within the cramped space. The number was not large, but with a small trap system like this, it was exactly the result we had hoped for. Without hesitation, we quickly secured the situation, collected the 2 boars, and loaded them onto the vehicle. Fresh bait was then spread, and the trap mechanism was reset from scratch, ready for the next activation. The next location was a fairly spacious clearing, an area that seemed ideal for deploying multiple traps at once. This time, I decided to set 3 traps right there, positioning them along routes the wild boars might use. But the result was not entirely what we expected. Only 1 trap was triggered. Still, that was enough. Inside that trap, a pair of wild boars had been held overnight, although the other 2 remained empty. Placing multiple traps increased our chances, and once again, we achieved the outcome we had anticipated. The third trap cage was placed beneath a large tree, where numerous signs suggested that wild boars often stopped before moving on. As we approached the site, we quickly realized that the trap had been activated. But as we got closer, the initial excitement quickly turned into slight disappointment. Not the mature animals we had been hoping for. Even so, they were still part of the overall control effort. Without wasting any time, we collected them, spread fresh bait, and reset the trap. With such a dense network of traps in place, a bigger result could come from any location next. Just as expected, the 4th trap was triggered during the night. When we arrived the following morning, we immediately sensed that this time was different. Inside the trap was only a single boar, but the moment we saw it, everyone stopped. The size of this wild boar far exceeded any of the animals we had collected earlier. Every movement caused the entire trap cage to shake, revealing remarkable strength and determination. Just one animal, yet worth more than several traps combined. And this time, it was clear that we had found the biggest target in the area. We tested a completely new design, a circular trap cage. Unlike the familiar square cages, the rounded structure reduced obvious corners, making everything appear more natural and less suspicious to the wild boars as they entered. And clearly, the change worked. When we returned to check it, the circular trap had been triggered. Inside, a pair of wild boars was confined, continuously moving around the curved structure of the trap, showing that they had completely let their guard down before entering. On the way back, as we passed the trap beneath the large tree, we were surprised to find that it had been triggered again. It happened incredibly fast. In just 2 hours, another pair of wild boars had fallen into the trap. This trap broke the record for activation speed, proving that this area was truly a hotspot where wild boars moved through constantly without the slightest caution. When the final traps had been checked, we wrapped up another long day of traveling through the forests of Texas. There were no massive captures involving entire groups this time, but the small trap system proved its effectiveness in a different way: steady, precise, and consistent. From small pairs of boars to a massive dominant animal, every trap delivered its own result. But looking back at the tracks still visible on the ground, I knew one thing for certain. There were still others out there that had yet to appear. And with the trap system already in place, it was only a matter of time before they stepped inside. We were assigned the mission at a point when the damage had already gone beyond control. In the United States, feral hogs cause more than $2.5 billion in damage every year to agriculture and ecosystems. Fields torn apart, fences destroyed, and crops nearly wiped out after only a few nights. We had no choice but to change our strategy. Hunting them one by one was no longer possible. Setting traps carelessly would not work. If we wanted to control them, we first had to understand how they moved and make them lower their guard before making our move. The first few days, the hogs approached the trap area but never fully entered. They fed around the edges, stopped, observed. We stayed patient. During this stage, we checked the entire system, from the drop door mechanism to the sensitivity of the trigger device, making sure everything would function perfectly when the real moment arrived. The following night, things began to change. A small group moved deeper inside, no longer stopping at the edges. They started feeding within the trap zone. I monitored everything through the camera system. Once the entire group was fully inside the control area, I activated the system. Bang! The door slammed shut in the darkness. The sound of metal echoed sharply, short, clean, decisive. The hogs scattered in panic, desperately trying to escape, but the locking system held firm. Not a single one could break free from this modern trapping system. That was the first confirmation. The trap was working exactly as intended. But I understood that was only the outer edge of the herd. The next morning, we returned to the site. What appeared before us exceeded every expectation. The number of hogs inside the enclosure proved that our plan had succeeded. Even after being captured, the feral hogs continued thrashing violently, trying every possible way to escape. We had to respond quickly, following the proper procedures established by wildlife protection authorities to ensure both safety and humane handling while avoiding unnecessary risks. When everything was finally over, the area slowly returned to its original silence, as if no disturbance had ever happened there at all. The next day, We received reports from local residents about feral hogs invading a nearby ranch. Without hesitation, the entire team moved out immediately. That night, the signals were completely different. More movement, denser activity. This was no longer a small group. It was a large portion of the herd. They approached far more cautiously. The hogs along the outer edge paused longer than usual, as if inspecting the environment. Just one mistake, especially triggering the trap too early, could cause the entire herd to retreat instantly. So I waited. The number inside the trap kept growing, layer by layer. And when the lead hog finally stepped in, I knew the moment had come. Without a second of hesitation, I pressed the trigger decisively. The door slammed shut. Bang! The steel frame shook violently as heavy impacts echoed throughout the area. Inside, the feral hogs fought wildly, throwing all their strength into desperate escape attempts. But the trap system stood firm, completely unmoved by their aggression. As everything slowly calmed down, the true scale of the herd finally revealed itself. Dozens of hogs, adults and piglets alike, were fully contained within the controlled zone. The next morning, we returned once again to inspect the site. This time, the hogs no longer had the strength to struggle as violently as before. Every single one remained secured within a specialized trap system, proving once again how effective the operation had been. Another successful mission. The local residents could finally breathe easier about their crops, at least for now. But we all understood clearly this was not the end. After the traps closed during the night, the most important part was never the moment of activation, but the way we returned to the site after. Daylight always reveals things the darkness hides, movement patterns, the level of impact, and most importantly, whether the trap structure managed to hold the entire herd. As we approached the area, there was no longer the chaos of the night before, only heavy movement from inside. I stopped before getting too close. Observe first. Always. The first signs became immediately clear. The ground around the trapdoor had been torn apart. The steel bars carried marks from repeated impacts, but there was no point of failure. That meant the system had held strong throughout the entire night. And when we looked inside, everything became undeniable. The entire herd had been contained. Not a single one remained outside. No signs of escape. Controlling wildlife in agricultural areas is not a direct confrontation. It is a process of reading behavior, rebuilding patterns, and waiting for the exact right moment to act. An effective trap is not only about its structure, but about how it is introduced into the environment without disrupting the herd's natural routine. When humans are patient enough to understand and disciplined enough not to act too early, control is no longer a matter of luck. It becomes a system. More than $1 million worth of crops in Texas vanished within just a few months under the hooves of wild feral hogs. As the damage continued to grow, we decided to place all our hopes on a remotely controlled aerial drop trap system. Why had feral hogs become so densely concentrated here? What had made them even more cunning? And would these traps still be effective this time? That was why I had no choice but to begin setting traps today. The first trap was placed right along the edge of the forest, where signs of feral hog activity were clearly visible. After finishing, we moved on to continue setting the remaining traps. By the afternoon, when we returned to inspect it, I immediately realized that something had happened. The trap had been triggered, and inside, an enormous feral hog had been caught cleanly, massive in size and extremely aggressive. As we approached, it constantly moved and slammed violently against the trap frame, creating heavy crashing sounds that made the atmosphere more tense than ever. The second trap was also placed along the forest edge, only about 600 meters from the first location. When we checked it, a pair of feral hogs had already been captured inside. They moved constantly within the confined space, reacting violently the moment they saw us approaching. But what caught my attention even more was this: a pair like this, under favorable conditions, could produce anywhere from 16 to 20 offspring within just a single year. That meant if they were not controlled in time, their numbers would rise incredibly fast. And catching them now meant eliminating a major threat before it could grow in the future. Next was a trap placed right beside the ranch area where we were staying, a location so familiar, even somewhat obvious, that at first I did not expect much from it. The trap was set during the day, and everything happened quickly, almost like a simple test to see whether the feral hogs were truly moving this close to the area. Once everything was finished, we left without thinking that anything significant would happen. But that evening, when we returned to inspect it, I nearly froze the moment I spotted the trap from a distance. The movements inside, the constant sounds of impacts, revealed that something far beyond our expectations had happened. And when we got closer, the sight in front of us genuinely shocked me. Inside the trap was such a large number of feral hogs that the entire enclosure was packed tight. They crowded together, moving chaotically and repeatedly crashing into the trap within the frame space. It was no longer just a few scattered animals. It was an entire group that had moved dangerously close to the ranch without us even realizing it. At that moment, I understood it had been much closer than we ever imagined. The next trap was placed deep inside the forest, in an area that had just been hit by heavy rain. Water had collected into muddy pools, and the ground had become slippery and difficult to move across. But those very conditions also made this place an ideal gathering point for feral hogs, a place with water and soft soil for rooting. After finishing the setup amid the damp surroundings and the heavy smell of wet earth, we left the area behind in silence. And judging by the signs around us, I was almost certain they would return. Exactly as expected, this trap became the one that delivered the biggest result. When we came back to inspect it, I could hardly believe my eyes. Inside were dozens of feral hogs packed together, from massive adults to smaller piglets crowded beneath them. The space, already narrow, had become completely overloaded. They moved frantically, continuously slamming into the metal frame and creating relentless crashing sounds. The scene in front of me not only showed how effective the trap had been, but also made me realize just how enormous the feral hog population in this area truly was. Finally came two smaller traps placed along the western edge of the forest. Although their size was modest and I did not initially expect much from them, the results still left me fairly satisfied. When we checked them, each trap had captured a pair of feral hogs. The space inside was tight, but still enough to hold them securely. And just like before, they reacted aggressively the moment they noticed people approaching. Looking at these results, I realized that even small traps, if placed in the right locations, could still be just as effective. After inspecting all the traps, we began gathering and transporting the feral hogs back to the collection point. The work was far from easy, as they continued reacting violently inside the confined spaces, forcing us to coordinate every movement carefully. Each trap was handled one by one, each animal loaded onto the trucks under constant tension but strict control. And as the final vehicle pulled away, I looked back at the area where the traps had been set and realized that this time we had accomplished far more than expected. But at the same time, it also reminded me that if we ever let our guard down, everything could quickly return to the way it was before. Texas is entering what should have been harvest season, the time when endless fields begin revealing the results of months of hard work. But instead of hope, more and more farmers are being forced to face a reality that is becoming impossible to ignore. Their crops are disappearing, not because of weather, not because of disease, but because of a threat spreading in a way no one seems able to control. At first, it looked like minor damage. A few rows of crops trampled in one field. A patch of soil dug up overnight. Signs so familiar that many people almost ignored them, because in Texas, wild pigs are nothing unusual, and in most cases, they do not cause truly devastating damage. But there was one problem. Those signs did not disappear. They spread, and they became worse with every passing day. Within a short period of time, from one farm to another, the same pattern began repeating itself. Crops were no longer simply being eaten, but completely destroyed. The ground was torn apart as though something were searching deep beneath the soil, and the tracks became so dense that there was no longer any doubt. This was not a few stray animals. This was an entire system. Elsewhere, security cameras captured a herd of wild pigs appearing close to 3 a.m., when everything was swallowed by darkness. And the way they moved immediately made people realize this was not chaotic instinct, but organized behavior. They spread out, kept their distance, and always left a few standing along the outer edges, almost as if they were guarding the rest of the herd. But things became even worse. After only a few nights, their behavior began to change. In one field, they started appearing later than usual. Somewhere else, they stopped returning through the same path. And in many cases, they completely avoided areas where humans had recently been present. For many farmers, this was the moment everything began slipping out of control. What they were facing was no longer just overwhelming numbers, but an animal capable of adapting at a deeply alarming speed. And with every passing night, the damage continued to grow, bringing financial pressure, fear for their families, and the helpless feeling of watching 3 months of labor slowly erased with no clear way to stop it. The only solution left was trapping them. Across many areas, traps began appearing in the centers of the most heavily damaged fields, with the hope of capturing entire herds instead of only a few animals. Because everyone understood the same thing. If only part of the herd was caught, the rest would return, and next time, they would be even more cautious. But there was another problem. Not every trap worked. At one farm, cameras recorded a group of pigs approaching a trap, only to stop moments before entering. They circled around it for several minutes before eventually leaving, abandoning the trap empty for the entire night. Somewhere else, the trap was triggered too early. A few pigs were captured, but most escaped. Only days later, they returned, but this time, not a single one step nearer. And then the same story repeated itself. Again and again, the traps were changed. The locations were adjusted. The strategies improved. But the pigs adapted as well. They arrived later, moved farther away, and there were always a few that stopped at the edge, as though making sure the rest of the herd would never walk into a trap they had already witnessed before. That was when many people realized a disturbing truth. This was no longer a battle of numbers. It was a battle of intelligence. But then, in the middle of countless failures, a video began spreading online. No one knew exactly where it had been filmed, only that it started like every attempt before it. A destroyed field, a newly placed trap, and another long night of waiting. But this time, everything unfolded differently. The camera captured the herd appearing one by one. Not rushing, not chaotic. They slowly moved into the trapping area, stopping to observe before continuing forward, as though carefully examining every small detail before making a decision. The numbers kept growing. 5 pigs, 10 pigs, then even more. But there was one problem. One pig standing at the edge suddenly stopped, then turned away. In previous situations, one movement like that would have caused the entire herd to retreat. But this time it did not happen. The lead pig stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and the rest followed. The moment stretched on in silence as the number of animals inside the trap increased second by second. And the man behind the camera understood immediately that this might be his only chance, because if he missed this moment, another opportunity like it might never come again. There was no room for mistakes. The trap was triggered instantly. The gate slammed shut with a violent metallic crash that shattered the night, followed by chaos as the herd desperately tried to escape. But this time, there was nowhere left to run. And for the first time in weeks, the balance began to shift. The next morning, the damage was still there. The fields were still destroyed. 3 months of labor could not be recovered. But for the first time, the greatest threat had been stopped. And for many farmers, that was not a complete victory. But it was enough to give them the confidence to continue the fight against the invasion of wild pigs. Because in Texas, this story is not happening in just one place. And it is not happening only once. Out there, across thousands of hectares of farmland, the wild pig herds are still moving, still adapting, still waiting for their next opportunity. And the most frightening part is not that they exist. It is that they are becoming smarter after every encounter. What would you do when facing over 200 pounds of muscle charging wildly through the darkness? For us, that's just another day on the job in Mississippi. With the support of infrared cameras and specialized net traps, we move in to eliminate the threat before crops are destroyed. Hop in and follow us into the hotspot right now. We are specialists in a rapid response wild hog control team in the Mississippi Delta. In this region, wild hogs are an ecological disaster. They tear up levees, destroy crops, and carry disease. Every day, my job starts with reading the signs. Freshly churned mud, deep hoof prints in damp soil, or scattered corn trails. That's how we map their movement. Our goal isn't blind eradication. It's safe wild boar trapping, minimizing the risk of accidents for both people and livestock. Two 20-foot pig brig net trap systems are already in place. The moment the hogs sense human presence, panic erupts inside the trap. They slam violently into the net walls, trampling over each other in a desperate attempt to escape. Dust explodes into the air, mixing with sharp, piercing squeals. But the net flexes, absorbing every impact and keeping them contained. To achieve this, we had been calculating and preparing for days. This system demands absolute patience. On Thursday night, we set the trap in conditioning mode. The net was suspended high on 6-foot steel T-posts, with dozens of pounds of corn spread evenly below. The hogs fed freely without feeling threatened. A few days later, we switched to capture mode. The net was lowered. Everything was ready, but wild hogs are not easy to fool. Camera data came in just after 1 a.m. Tension built in my chest as I watched the herd circle the trap on my phone screen. They were smarter than expected. The entire group stayed outside, using their snouts to eat the bait around the edges. Not a single one stepped fully under the hanging net. That was the real test. If we lost patience and intervened, we'd lose everything. Nearly an hour later, the lead sow finally gave in to hunger. She lifted the edge of the net with her snout and slipped inside. The rest followed immediately. Success. The next morning, as we approached, the entire group was in chaos. Mud splattered across the net, hooves sliding violently across the soaked ground until we began restraining them one by one. Around 11 p.m., the camera showed a large boar slowly approaching a circular cage trap with a netted entrance. It was extremely cautious, feeding only at the edge, its body not fully inside. Finally, it stepped fully inside. The 200-pound mass stood still for a moment, confused, chewing corn as if it hadn't yet realized it was trapped. That night, we headed out again to another trap site near a livestock farm. We arrived on site. A teammate pointed quietly to a torn section of a net. Earlier, a hog had escaped through that exact spot. We had patched it, but the backup clips weren't strong enough. Wild hogs have excellent memory. If this one found that weak point again, it could escape. We weren't taking that risk. A single, decisive shot rang out. The threat was neutralized instantly. The next morning, we returned to clear the site. The hogs inside were still aggressive. Our muscles tensed as we tightened our grip on specialized catch poles. The looped snare tightened just enough to control each animal's resistance. Working in sync, we secured them one by one and loaded them efficiently onto the pickup truck. By early afternoon, the pickup stopped at the final trap site. The most destructive individuals in the area were here. Inside, they charged and slammed into the net in desperation. We continued processing them one by one. The job ended as the sun began to dip. Exhaustion set in, but the control operation was complete.
Go. Go, yeah. Hip, hip, get turned. Hip, hip, hip.
It didn't begin in the fields or at the forest edge. It began right inside the working heart of the farm. A herd of wild boars appeared in the very spaces where people carry out their daily lives. What they left behind were overturned tables and chairs, damaged equipment, and a workplace thrown into chaos. And when wild boars grow so accustomed that every time they appear, they walk straight into human workspaces, this is no longer a story about crops. It is a clear sign that the control system has reacted more slowly than the boar's ability to adapt. The moment had come for us, those entrusted with protecting the peace of this land, to act decisively. Shall we go then? The most common mistake in wild boar management is not a lack of tools, but poor timing and flawed execution. Set a trap along the wrong route, trigger it too early, or let even a single animal escape, and the entire herd will remember what happened. From that moment on, they grow more alert, alter their movement patterns, and become willing to push deeper into human spaces. When this happens, any reaction driven by impulse or emotion risks pushing the situation completely out of control. In this situation, the goal is not to chase the animals away, certainly not to cause panic. The top priority is to stop the herd from continuing to access the work area, prevent them from scattering in multiple directions, and avoid creating additional risks for people. The chosen solution is a large coral-style trap integrated with a remote monitoring camera system. This tool allows decisions to be made based on real data, not guesswork. The camera clearly identifies the size of the herd, their approach routes, and the exact moment when the boars are least alert. In wildlife control, accurate information is just as important as the trap itself. Automatic cameras are positioned along multiple approach routes around the trap, covering the entire movement zone of the boar herd. This setup is not about catching more animals. It is about minimizing risk to people. Every decision is based on real-time visual evidence, with no guesswork and no rushed reactions. Only when the entire herd is fully within the safe control zone is the system activated. When the cameras confirm that the entire herd is inside the trap, the system is activated remotely. The automatic drop mechanism seals all exits in an instant, containing the herd within a closed, fully controllable space. No individual panics and escapes. No movement spills over into areas where people live and work. The risk is stopped exactly at the point of intrusion. This is the fundamental difference between technology-based control and traditional manual methods. Instead of relying on a single trap, the system is deployed across multiple strategic points, known travel routes, areas near food sources, and access points close to farm structures. This approach prevents the herd from scattering in multiple directions, reduces pressure on any single trap, and increases overall control of the entire area. It is a long-term control strategy, well suited to farm environments where people live and work on a daily basis.
You're looking.
A single small mistake in trap placement can turn a controlled situation into a serious threat to the entire farm. Once wild boars cross into restricted areas, what matters most is not reacting the fastest, but reacting with precision. Technology, timing, and disciplined decision-making allow risks to be contained responsibly, before people are forced to pay a heavy price. This is not just about controlling wild boars, it is about protecting safety, order, and the daily rhythm of an entire community, effectively and without unnecessary strain on human effort.
I've lived in Columbus, Georgia for more than 20 years, and I never thought there would come a day when I'd have to guard my farm like a battlefield. Everything started with just a few strange tracks in the field. I ignored them until the next morning when the entire crop was torn apart as if a storm had ripped through overnight. Then they came back, not one, but an entire herd of wild hogs. They smashed fences, tore up the soil, and trampled the harvest I'd spent months caring for. And I realized one thing: if I didn't stop them right now, I was going to lose everything. The first traps were set right along the forest edge, where the hogs usually poured out each night. Not placed randomly, not done in haste. Every location was carefully studied, based on the herd's familiar travel routes. But trapping only at the edge was not enough. Deeper inside the forest, more zones began to be secured as well. Transit points, trails, resting spots, feeding grounds, all of it was gradually brought into the control system. A network, was taking shape. We split into teams. Each person was given a role. Everything moved quickly. Once the traps were in place, technology entered the operation. Motion sensor cameras were installed. Automatic target recognition systems recorded every animal that appeared. Every movement was tracked. Every time the herd returned, we had data. No more guessing. No more passive reactions. Everything now was under our control. And after a period of monitoring, we kept bait inside while the trapdoors remained open, watching everything through our devices. When the moment came and the whole herd naturally gathered inside to feed, I looked at my father and knew everything was ready. The decisive moment had arrived. Just one button. The enclosed system activated instantly. Escape routes were blocked almost at the same time. No gaps. No way back. Bang! The drop gate slammed shut with incredible speed. Inside, the wild hogs immediately fell in a panic. They scattered, spun in circles, searched every direction for a way out. But every path led to the same ending. A closed circle, no matter how intelligent they were. They gradually lost all sense of direction. Within minutes, the resistance began to fade. No more desperate charges. No more clear attempts to escape. The entire herd was contained inside the trap system. It was over. I looked at my father, and everyone there let out a breath of relief. That same night, reports came in from every other trap we had placed. They had all been triggered, capturing many more targets waiting for their chance to destroy farms and neighborhoods. No one needed to say anything, but everyone understood. After that night, the whole community would finally sleep in peace, no longer fearing their crops would be ruined again. But the most important thing was never the trap. It was the way the community chose to act. The individuals causing the greatest damage were selected first and dealt with through humane, swift, and carefully controlled methods. No chaos, no extremism, just responsible action to avoid unnecessary panic for the animals while bringing real economic relief to local families. This approach was never about wiping them out entirely, but about reducing risk while still respecting ecological balance. And it was true. After that night, silence returned. No more tangled tracks every morning. No more torn up soil after every dark night. But what truly changed was the way people faced the problem. No more rushed reactions. No more isolated efforts. Instead, observe, understand, then act at the right moment. Because in situations like this, the most important decision is not how fast you act, it is whether you have enough patience to wait for the right time. Recently, the fields have no longer been as peaceful as before. By day, everything still looks green and thriving, but after just one night, the soil is torn apart, plants bitten through, an entire corner of the garden turned into a battlefield. Overlapping footprints of all sizes, this isn't one animal, but a whole herd. There was no other choice. We had to act, not to hunt, but to protect the crops, to protect livelihoods. The traps were set the evening before. Bait was placed along their familiar paths. Everything was carefully prepared, and what happened overnight meant that at first light today, our priority was to check the traps. The first cage appeared at the edge of the field. Inside was a small group. We quickly noticed something. Their fur wasn't the same, black, brown, even striped. This wasn't random. It showed that multiple groups had merged, a sign the herd was growing, expanding its range. Give it a few more weeks, and this place would become their permanent feeding ground. Inside the cage, they pressed together, breathing heavily, unable to escape. We moved to another trap. Some of the boars inside reacted violently. They slammed their heads into the steel frame again and again. Others behaved differently, slipping to the side, using their snouts to probe each bar, searching for the smallest gap to break free. This is something many people overlook. Not every animal reacts the same way. The steel bars rattled, echoing sharp metallic clangs. This was no longer feeding behavior. This was survival instinct. In another corner, a smaller trap had also been triggered. Inside was a single adult and a few juveniles. The confined space prevented them from gaining momentum or coordinating like they could in the open. This is the key point. You don't need a large trap. Just the right placement is enough to hold even the strongest animal. The result from last night made one thing clear. The traps worked, not by chance, but through careful calculation, placing traps along movement paths, dividing positions, baiting according to the herd's habits. But we couldn't stop yet. The traps remained. The bait was replenished. Tonight will be the next test. Slam. The trap door dropped shut. Both were caught, thrashing inside. A good sign. The herd was beginning to lose its caution at the first point. Not long after, at another trap set nearby, a different adult appeared, larger, more cautious. It circled, paused, stepped back, then moved forward along the bait trail. The moment it stepped inside, slam, the second trap snapped shut. Chaos erupted inside, with its size and behavior. We assessed it as a dangerous individual, likely a dominant, experienced animal that had been causing repeated damage in the area. The final outcome of the night came at another trap point. Two were already caught inside. They continued to panic, slamming repeatedly against the steel frame. But outside, A few others had already sensed something was wrong. They didn't move in, just a split second of hesitation. Then they turned and bolted, disappearing into the deep forest. The sound faded into the distance, leaving behind a trap still trembling. And this is something we have to accept. No trapping system is 100% effective. The goal is to break the herd, to reduce the destruction they bring to the crops. The next morning, we returned together to check the traps. At one cage, several were still held inside. One kept jumping, throwing its full weight upward. Clang! It tried to smash against the top of the cage, but it was useless. Trying to escape, but couldn't. The next steps were carried out quickly and efficiently. We secured the cages, transported all the boars out of the farming area, ensuring they would not return to destroy another night. Everything was done according to proper procedures and legal regulations. The final stage, we proceeded with humane handling in full compliance with legal guidelines. No prolonging, no display, just what had to be done. This is not hunting. This is how farmers protect their crops, protect the work of their own hands. What do you think about this approach? As wild boar damage becomes more severe, what other choices do farmers really have? This time, we moved into an entirely new area in Arizona, a place where the dry terrain, dense low brush, and rocky crevices made both movement and trap placement far more difficult than before. Fresh wild hog tracks still appeared clearly across the hardened ground, proving that the animals had adapted quickly to the harsh environment here. But the question was whether the traps that had worked so effectively in Texas would still perform under completely different conditions. Or this time, would we need to change our strategy once again just to keep up with them? The first trap was installed early in the morning at a location filled with clear movement trails. With Arizona's dry terrain, I expected it would take quite some time before the wild hogs returned. But everything happened much faster than expected. Only a short while later, the activation signal appeared. There was no time to wait, and we immediately moved toward the trap location. Even from a distance, the movement inside showed that the result was far from small. As we got closer, the entire group of wild hogs had already been trapped inside. Without hesitation, we quickly secured the situation and handled everything before the animals could create any danger. The second trap was placed deep in the forest during daylight, in an area covered with signs showing that wild hogs frequently pass through. Everything was completed fairly early, but this time we did not receive an immediate signal like we had with the previous trap. It was not until late at night that the trap was finally triggered. Because of the difficult terrain and poor visibility, I decided not to take unnecessary risks by approaching during the night, and instead waited until the following morning. When we returned to inspect it, the result was obvious. The trap had successfully held several wild hogs after many hours inside the enclosure. And as usual, we quickly secured the situation and began collecting everything before moving on to the next location. The final trap was left overnight in a hidden section of the forest. Through the monitoring cameras, we confirmed that the trap had been triggered during the previous night, when the wild hogs returned along their familiar movement route. The next morning, without hesitation, we headed directly toward the final trap location. The moment we arrived, everything became clear. The wild hogs were still trapped inside after spending hours confined within the enclosure. Without wasting time, we quickly brought the situation under control and handled everything, bringing the final trapping operation in this area to a close. When the final trap had been checked, our entire operation in Arizona also came to an end. Despite the harsher terrain and greater challenges compared to previous locations, the trap placements this time still proved highly effective. Every trap, every activation showed that wild hogs still move according to their own patterns, and as long as the right location is found, they can still make mistakes. But that is also why none of this is ever truly finished. Because out there, deep within the dry forests of Arizona, there are still fresh tracks waiting to be discovered, and sooner or later, we will definitely return.